I was having an affair. I cheated on my husband 3 times before my lover and I got careless and got caught. Thank God he didn't catch us. It would have destroyed him. Well, it would have destroyed him even more. Either way, it led to the destruction of our marriage, but at least he didn't have eye contact. No, we were caught by a coworker, one who resented our success and didn't hesitate to throw us off our pedestal. It wasn't like I was waiting for it to happen. My therapist finally made me realize that nothing happens just for fun. You make choices every day of your life, and from that moment on, the consequences change your life. She taught me that a person makes choices whether they realize it or not. So I had an affair. I wish I could say I was drunk or drugged, but the first time I had 3 glasses of wine the whole evening. He was very handsome, and we flirted lightly for almost a year. We happened to be on the same team and often did projects together. We even joked about being work spouses to our other halves when we were all together, and everyone laughed. My husband grinned. Okay, as the official work husband, I'm shifting the cost of her shoe fetish to you. His wife got into an altercation with us. Yes, and I'm passing the training on to you on how to leave the toilet seat down. We expect regular progress reports. We all laughed and hugged before leaving the party. The hubby told me how much he liked them on the way home, and maybe we should invite them into our circle. They had just moved here and were burning to make friends, and we subsequently spent many pleasant evenings with them and our other friends who accepted them unconditionally. I won't bore you with descriptions of appearances such as how big my breasts were or how well he was toned. What does it really matter? We were young, fit, quite attractive, and that was the end of it. And by no means am I talking about sex. My husband was in his 30s as the oldest of us. The rest of us were in our early 30s. I had a good job. I had gotten it right out of college and was moving up in the ranks. I had several promotions over the years, and the old man, he was in his 70s, who owned the company often told me that I was just the kind of daughter he wished he had. I became a team leader, which required an average of 1 night off every 2 months. I didn't like it, but hubby said it was no big deal. I would leave Thursday morning, spend the afternoon and next morning in meetings, and usually get home by 4. When I got home, we usually made love like we hadn't seen each other in weeks. But as it became routine, things cooled down. It wasn't that we were bored with each other. We were young, and we enjoyed making love an average of 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes, if we were really busy, it might be once a week. But as soon as we had the chance, we tried to catch up. We dated for 8 months and lived together for almost a year before we got married. We were together for 3.5 years as a married couple. The sex happened after a pretty intense round of meetings, and we were both wound up. We had dinner together and drank a bottle of wine. Oddly enough, the main topic was about how much we missed our spouses and some future activities we were planning together as couples. A comment was made, which we agreed with, that when we were as wound up as we were now, sex with our spouses was the preferred stress reliever. I remember it being said, but can't remember who said it, me or him. Then it progressed to light flirting, hints, and minor touching. He joked that, being work spouses, we should exercise the privilege of our actual spouses. I'll admit it, he was handsome and always found the right words, which made him invaluable to my team. We finagled the wine, but eventually retired to our rooms alone. I was thinking about him, lying in bed, touching myself, using him as food for fantasy, when a knock sounded on my door. I threw on my robe, opened the door, and saw him standing there with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. We had no sooner finished the first glass than we were already pouncing on each other. Soon we were on my bed. Neither of us lasted long, but we lay there, caressing and nuzzling each other until it was time for round 2. He left me at 3 in the morning. I collapsed back into bed and fell asleep like a murderer. I woke up at 7, feeling suffocated, literally gulping for air. I had cheated on my husband, shoved my vows into a dark corner of my mind, and had sex like an animal. I probably took the longest shower of my life trying to wash away what I had done. He was depressed, too. He barely met my gaze during our morning round of meetings. We were seriously ineffective that day. We didn't even sit together on the airplane ride home. We danced around each other for 2 weeks before he walked into my office and closed the door. We talked for 45 minutes. He apologized for approaching me, and I apologized for accepting his offer. We agreed that this would be a one-time thing, and we would take this secret with us to the grave. It went on for 6 months. I thought we had put the past behind us. I know that for about a month I felt as depressed as was humanly possible until hubby bluntly asked me what was bothering me. Almost fainting, I came to my senses and told him it was work-related. Technically not a lie, but I had resolved it, and the problem was in the past. He frowned and then almost broke my heart. I'm going to call Ix and tell him to keep a closer eye on you. After all, if his wife and I could, I'd do the same. 6 months later, Christmas came, and we were stuck for 2 days in a northern town due to one of the worst snowstorms in history. My husband and I talked a couple times a day, and he told me to let my workaholic husband entertain me. He told me that he and Mrs. X were going to go to the theater together to see a show I had been looking forward to all year. He could tell I was upset. If it bothers you, we're not going. I'll give her the tickets. Maybe her sister can go. I recovered enough to tell him it was okay, but he owed me a big surprise for next Christmas. He agreed and said he was already working on it. X and I sympathized, and he complained about how much his wife liked my husband. It's always, "Look how attentive he is. It must be nice to be treated like a queen. Did I tell you about the dainty necklace he bought her just because he saw it and thought how good it looked on her?" I unconsciously stroked the necklace, smiling at the joy it gave me. It was a complete surprise, not my birthday, not Christmas, just because a sensual neck like yours deserves it. It will emphasize the smoothness and perfection of your skin. He wasn't perfect, and he had minor flaws that annoyed me to no end. Then I saw other couples in our group, how the women envied me and the men either admired him or were disgusted because he held the bar so high. Then I would just smile and squeeze his hand a little tighter. We ended up getting drunk and fucking for 2 days. We were still doing it when they called my room to let us know that the airport was now open and we could head home. We showered together, sat on the plane together, and vowed that while we enjoyed it immensely, it would absolutely never happen again. 4 months later, we got caught. I know you want to know about the sex. It was sex between 2 young, healthy adults. Yeah, it was good. Was it worth the price? No. Without going into detail, the consequences were enormous. My boss called us both out separately. He was almost in tears when he saw me. "I can't tell you how disappointed I am in you. You were the best of the best. I always admired your marriage. I thought it was very similar to mine when my wife and I first started our journey together. Do you still have a husband?" I nodded, not bothering to hide my tears. Yes, I was still married, even if I hadn't seen my husband in 2 weeks. Good. He was a wonderful man. I hope deep down he forgives you. I have to protect my business and I can't be so lenient. You still have your job, but your days as a team leader are numbered. You will never travel representing this company again or represent it publicly. Do you understand? I nodded, happy that I still had a job. However, I knew my days at his company were numbered. My star would never rise higher than I was now. Sometime in the future, I would have to wipe the dust off my resume and hope he gave me a reasonable recommendation. Things were not going so well for X. He quietly left in exchange for a reasonable recommendation. I was sure it was carefully written. "Mr. X has excellent communication skills, works well with others, blah, blah, blah." However, I knew that if any of my boss's friends thought about hiring him, a quiet word would get through and the old boy network would be up and running. I truly believed that if we talked, we would both apologize for ruining each other's lives. However, we didn't. Our boss and spouses took care of it. My husband, from whom I had never heard him raise his voice, told X unequivocally that when he finally found him, he would wish he had killed him because it would be a miserable, painful life from then on. X believed him and left for an unknown destination as soon as his divorce was final. He left behind a devastated wife and a 5-year-old son. I think it took her years to come to her senses. It took 8 years before she remarried to an older man who doted on her and her son. He asked his son what kind of car he would like for his 16th birthday and couldn't stand it when the boy told him that what he would appreciate more than a car was the use of his last name. Thus, with one stroke of a pen, X was out of his life forever, and his new daddy bought him a first-class sports car, despite his mother's objections. X never saw his son again after he left, though his wife tried to find him to remind him that she had divorced him, but their son would not. I found my life suddenly divided into segments, eras, if you will. There were before the affair and after the affair in my life. I remember the before affair being full of light and happiness, and the after affair being full of grayness and despair. Thankfully, after the affair was nowhere near the same time as before the affair. Then it was time to choose a side. Other couples broke up in our usually tight little circle, and the remaining couples didn't know how to handle it. Who do we invite to barbecues, parties outside the house, and sleepovers at home? Gone were the casual flirtations and innuendos, afraid it would bring back horrible memories for those who were still around. I was kind of glad when we sold the house and moved apart. I'm sure other couples breathed a sigh of relief, just not in front of us. The women in the circle sympathized with my plight, offered me support, but made sure I didn't get too close to their husbands. After all, I had already upset one marriage that had been a happy one, and there was no need to tempt fate. Things were even worse for X. The men supported him by making damn sure he never got intimate with their wives, ever. There was a lot more support for hubby and Mrs. X. After all, they were resentful, right? It wasn't their fault they were in the mess their lives had become. Then I had to move on to phase 3, telling my parents, friends, and relatives. I disappointed both couples, but both forgave me even though my marriage fell apart. I still send Christmas cards to his parents and gifts for their birthdays. They always sent me cards in return, and a few years later his parents asked me to visit them if I came to town. I never went, but thanked them warmly for their kindness. The first casualty in the post-romance era was our personal lives. We used to tease, torment, make slow, languid love, or chase like animals, depending on our moods. It took 3 weeks for hubby to come back to us and another 6 before we attempted any intimacy. It was a complete disaster. We were both afraid. Him of being compared to X and deemed inadequate. Me of doing the wrong thing and it would bring back horrible memories. Months went by and it mostly got better. We were trying to pleasure each other when I could feel his body just shutting down. At first I understood it all, but near the end I started to resent it. Couldn't he see how hard I was trying, how much I loved him? We went through counseling and it helped. It helped us realize that it was over between us. I had betrayed his trust, and it didn't matter how hard I tried, how hard I worked to heal his heart. The wound was too great. So after 5 years, we were no more. The divorce wasn't contentious, just a straight split equally. I didn't even cry when I got the final papers. We saw each other from time to time because our town wasn't very big. We always said hello to each other and were polite, but that was it. I remember how heartbroken I was in year 4 after the affair, when I looked out the window of a cafe downtown and saw him with a woman. She smiled, sitting next to him, giving him the intimate touches that every woman considers reserved for a lover. I went home and cried my eyes out one last time. I sent out resumes everywhere and received an offer from a firm 2 states away. It was a major step forward and just what I needed. I said goodbye to the friends I was parting ways with, kissed my parents, and moved on. I have now moved into the post-divorce era. I thought about the psychologist I went to for a few months after my divorce. She really helped me, without being sympathetic or accusatory, mostly just listening. At our penultimate session, she surprised me by pulling her blouse out from under her skirt and pulling it down a bit. There was a rather large scar on the side of her thigh. She adjusted her clothes and sighed. We were young, about 16 or 17, and my friend asked her older brother to get us some drinks. It was mostly liquor, so it intoxicated us pretty quickly. We went deeper into the woods to stay out of sight and made a fire when it got dark. It wasn't that big, and one thing entailed another, and then a risk. So one boy jumped into the fire. Soon we were encouraging each other, and we were all doing it. I was making my 5th jump when I tripped and landed on the smoldering embers on my side. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, and that scar will never go away. After I got my degree, I realized it was a conscious decision I made to jump over the fire. The more I did it, the easier it got until I became careless. That scar is my cost. The point I'm trying to make here is that you made a conscious decision to have sex with a man outside of marriage, and when nothing happened, when you realized you could get away with it, you did it again and again until you got caught. She was quiet for a moment before continuing, repeating herself. You did it over and over until you got careless and got caught. Do you understand? You can't explain it away as a momentary situation. Your choice to continue meant that even though you jumped over the fire several times and felt safe, you eventually tripped and fell. The scars you carry are on the inside and they will never go away, but they will get smaller over time. Next time you have to make a choice, remember to scratch your scars. I thought about it a lot over the next week before I realized she was right. I could blame it on X. He showed up at my door, but he didn't forcefully barge in, and everything that happened once the door closed behind him was a mutual decision, just like the subsequent times that followed were a simple decision on my part. So here I was, divorced for 4 years now. I had heard from relatives that hubby had found someone new. They had been married for a year and had a brand new son. I started dating about 6 months after the divorce, but there was no spark with either of them. I admit that I took one of them to bed with me on occasion just to fulfill my needs. Right after the last one left, I was lying in my bed looking back at my life and realized that I had to let go of the past if I wanted to ever be happy again. I stopped going to bars and clusters of guys, joined a gym, and became involved in social activities. Once I was fit enough, I participated in 5K and 10K races. I never finished in the top 10, but I made a lot of friends. A fellow runner and I got along so well that we trained together. After training, we'd have coffee, then lunch, then dinner. We dated for 4 months before he let me into his bed. He was so attentive and caring that I cried after the first time. 4 months later, we were doing well, and he hinted at an upgrade when I told him why I was single. I wanted him to see me for who I was before and who I was now. I assured him that I'd been faithful to him from the first date, that the mistakes I'd made in the past were just mistakes I wasn't going to make again. I didn't know it, but he had been married before and divorced when he caught her having multiple affairs. It was carved in stone in his mind. Once a cheater stays a cheater forever, and the relationship died. I grieved for a while but moved on. The next year I learned that God had indeed forgiven us for our sins. More importantly, I found a man who was able to forgive me. He was 7 years older, but he was lean and trim. We met at a race, and we both crossed the finish line at the same time. I was so happy to finish that I did a little victory dance, lost my balance on the uneven sidewalk, crashed into him, and we both fell. Instead of being upset, he laughed. I landed on top of him, and within a minute we were lying nose to nose. I tried to apologize, and he smirked. You know, if you wanted my attention, you could have smiled, maybe flirted a little. Fighting was a bit much. However, I'll forgive you tomorrow night at dinner. I hope you like French food. He handed me a business card from his gym bag. Give me a call and let me know what time is most convenient for you. It's kind of an upscale place, so wear a nice dress. I was still trying to form coherent words when he cupped his palms around my face and kissed my cheek gently. Then he disappeared. My running buddies laughed hysterically. That didn't take long, did it? If I'd known that socializing with a man would interest him, I'd have given that cute salesman a crack at the first time he showed up. Good girl. Did you know he's the 4th most eligible bachelor in town? No? Well, good luck. The restaurant lived up to the billing. He was carelessly but elegantly dressed, must have been in very expensive clothes, and his tie must have been pure silk. I was wearing my best dress, which I bought at a huge discount because they tore the hem. One of my hobbies was sewing, so I cleaned up the rip by cutting it out and raising the hem a little more than an inch. I thought it emphasized my legs, and I must have been right, judging by the way my date was looking at them. The date went well, as did the subsequent ones covering an 8-month period. He was trim, attractive, and gave me hot thoughts I hadn't experienced in years. It was turning into love. I hadn't felt this happy after making love since I was pre-divorce. It broke my heart, but I was being truthful. He listened to me, holding out tissues and rubbing my shoulders while I cried. I tried to gauge the look on his face, and he seemed a little surprised. I understand if you don't want to see me. I'm not afraid to tell you that I've developed strong feelings for you, and that if you continue to date me and it goes any further, I'll sign any document, accept any prenuptial agreement you propose, if it means being with you. He hugged me gently. I know all about your former marriage and affair. Yes, I researched you, invaded your privacy. Understand, I fell in love with you and couldn't understand why such a beautiful and desirable woman was still single. So you've made a terrible mistake, but you seem to have accepted your responsibility and its corresponding price, and that's very important to me. He got up, walked to his home office, and returned with a small box and a large envelope. He held out the envelope first. "Read this. If you don't mind, after you're done, open the box." Before asking for a pen, I reread the papers in the envelope twice. I signed in all the allotted spaces and handed them back to him. I had just signed an agreement that said I had a 20-year probationary period, but if I met the requirements, it would be canceled at the end of the term. There was only one clause in the contract, that I would be a faithful and devoted wife. I dropped the box on the coffee table twice before I opened it and cried as I slipped the ring on my finger. So, I entered my era of supreme happiness. We lived happily ever after. I didn't deserve it, but I learned to live with it, and over the years I made damn sure he knew I would never let him down. I recently went home for a reunion and ended up sitting with my ex and his wife. It was a stretch at first, but it's been 15 years. Eventually, we had an open conversation. I apologized one last time. He accepted it and told me that he had forgiven me a long time ago because the anger and hurt was too much to carry around. I told him that it took more than a few years to forgive myself, but that I finally made it. We spent the rest of the evening talking and showing pictures of our children. We had 2, both girls, and they had 3 boys. That's the moral of the story. Sometimes good people do stupid things. Even if they didn't mean to, even if they don't get caught, it will haunt them for the rest of their lives. There will always be a quiet voice in the back of their brain that whispers, "What if this is the day they find out?" I was arrogant because deep down, I truly believed that if I got caught, hubby would forgive me. You can all see how well that worked out. I watch my girls like a hawk, and when they are old enough to understand, I am going to tell them about my past, and hopefully they will have the maturity to learn from it and forgive me. I'm also going to tell them the story of the scars. This is it. My therapist was right. It feels good to get it off my chest. Thanks for reading. And if I helped you make a decision that will prevent you from creating a life-changing event, then good. If I didn't, well, that's all on you. If you think about it, think about how well you can bear the scars.